Cover crops are an integral part of sustainable agriculture because of their role in soil stewardship, pest management, and crop rotation. While many vegetable farmers in the Northeast use cover crops, typically the practice is limited to small grains for preventing winter soil erosion. This video features 10 experienced vegetable farmers from 5 states, explaining how they use cover crops in more innovative ways. The farmers describe which species of cover crops they plant and how they are managed. Viewers can decide for themselves whether a particular practice is suited for trial on their own farm.
I'm Hank Bissell. We're at Lewis Creek Farm in Starksboro, Vermont. We have 60 acres under cultivation, 35 acres of vegetables. We sell wholesale, retail at the farmer's market, and retail at the farm stand. I'm a cover crop fanatic. Anything that's not in vegetables, I want to keep in a cover crop. I think of it as a bit of a free lunch, where there's very little time or money invested for a lot of fertility returned. Winter rye is the basic cover crop that most people use. I used to just grow winter rye, and about 10 years ago I started growing hairy vetch in with the rye. Hairy vetch is a winter annual. It's planted in the fall, puts on a little bit of growth, stays alive through the winter, and then puts on a lot of growth in the spring, much the way rye does. Without nodulation, the vetch wouldn't fix any nitrogen. When I first started growing vetch, I inoculated it every year. I'm much more casual about it now. Sometimes I don't inoculate at all. This field was not inoculated last fall, and it does have nodules on it. Now that I've grown it all over my farm, the inoculant is resident in the fields. When I plow rye and hairy vetch down at this stage for crop, sweet corn for instance, I find that I can do without most of the nitrogen, normal nitrogen applications. I do put on a starter. I put on about 30 pounds with a starter mix, 30 pounds of nitrogen. Then I keep track of it with a pre-side dress nitrogen test to see if I've got, if we've got heavy rains, we might lose a lot of it. I find that the amount of nitrogen that rye and hairy vetch produces will feed early to mid season varieties of corn completely. So corn's up to about 5 feet high. When you get into those big late varieties of corn, they seem to be using enough more nitrogen that it requires an additional side dressing. This is a field of oats and vetch. What's noticeable is there's no oats. This is the spring. The oats have winter killed. What's good about that is you don't have that coarse, grassy matter that takes so much time to break down. The major thing I like about oats and vetch is that when it's plowed, it leaves a lot less stemmy trash and makes a nice fine seed bed. It's good for direct seeding. The rye and vetch is better for transplanting.
Yeah, California.
Well, they
Yeah. White, that's pretty.
I like to get all the fields covered with a cover crop, but some crops come off too late in the season to get a cover crop in. The last seeding date for winter rye is October 15th. So for crops that are harvested after that date, you either have to leave the field bare or you can interseed them. We came in with buckets of rye seed, each person taking one row and scattering seed up through the row. One person could do an acre in 40 minutes. I use this technique of interseeding rye on most of the late season cole crops: broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. This was a field of cauliflower. The rows are closer together than Brussels sprouts. You have to be a little bit careful not to get rye seed into the cauliflower plants. You don't want the rye to get in the plants because it'll actually grow in the head just from the moisture of dew alone. This is a field of Brussels sprouts that was protected through the winter by winter rye. We got the rye on here the first week in September. We cultivated it in, and now we have a good crop of rye protecting the field and something to plow down as well.
My name is Will Stevens. I live in Shoreham, Vermont. My wife Judy and I farm Golden Russett Farm. It's an 82-acre farm with 10 to 12 acres of vegetables in any given year and the balance in hay and pasture. We sell wholesale, retail at the farmers market in Middlebury. We have a CSA and a farm stand here as well. I like using cover crops because I feel as though the ground should be green as opposed to brown. When we first started farming, to me a beautiful field was a clean field, brown, cultivated, tidy. Over the years I've come to feel as though a healthy field is a field that's green as much as possible. Some of the reasons I like cover cropping are nutrient uptake in the fall. With my grass crops, my wheat, it'll mop up any nitrogen that might be left over after the vegetable crop. With the legumes, I'm hoping to fix nitrogen as a nutrient source, and erosion control would be the third reason. Hold the soil during the winter. This is a field of winter wheat that followed a corn crop last year. We planted it in September. We have a clay loam soil here, which is one reason I grow wheat. In the springtime, when it gets quite wet, we don't have a great window of opportunity to plow it under. Rye would go to stalk a lot quicker than wheat, at least 2 weeks earlier than wheat. And wheat stays shorter and more leafy. So that helps me in my management, especially in a wet spring, because I can plow it down and still end up with a nice seed bed without having to mow it and then plow it. One of the things to be aware of when growing wheat, though, is that it is an alternate host to thrips, onion thrips, which in our case is becoming a big problem. Another option I'm trying with wheat is to rest the field entirely the second season. And the way I'm doing that is to frost seed clover. This clover was frost seeded in April last year. I then went in June and mowed the wheat off to release the clover seedlings, and then let it go all season, let the clover grow, and I'll let it go again this season before plowing it in next year for a vegetable crop. Some of the advantages I hope to see coming from this fallow system are nitrogen fixation with the clover here, weed suppression, and better tilth and soil health. Well, one of the things I like about putting legumes in my rotation is that I need the nitrogen source. The supply of manure that we've had in the past is drying up as ag economics change, and so I'm going to need to find alternatives. Another way I'm working legumes into my rotation is using hairy vetch. This was a field of winter squash last year that I overseeded the hairy vetch on the 4th of July last year, and then rotary hoed it in, and then it was dry then, so I irrigated that in. The vetch is able to live in the shade throughout the summer as the squash vines over it. Then at harvest time, we just come in, we harvest, frost takes the squash out, the vetch continues to grow in a typical fall for a couple months, way into November in some years. So now it's the end of May, about 10 months have gone by. It's not quite budded up yet, but I'm ready to use the field. So I'll be plowing this down. Traditionally, organic systems have recommended 50% of your acreage into vegetable production and 50% out of production in any given year. If I can do 40% as a cover crop, fallow, and 60% vegetables, that'll be good for me.
Hi, I'm Cliff Hatch. We're in Gill, Mass. Our farm is Upinngill. We have a U-pick strawberry business. We raise and pick about 5 acres of strawberries every year. The farm is 80 acres. 20 acres of that is devoted strictly to strawberries. Then we do some other vegetable crops to add to our mix on our stand. And we wholesale some berries to the organic food co-ops in the valley. We're picking 5 acres of strawberries a year, and we have 15 other acres waiting to be planted to strawberries at any one time. The first year of our rotation always involves buckwheat for weed suppression and to build up organic matter. The year prior to planting strawberries, we always plant Sudan grass to suppress nematodes as well. Every year there's a winter rye cover. Any land that is not used for planting berries or that is just waiting, we use for rye production because we need as much rye as we can produce every year for mulch that we put on in the fall. This is rye left from last year's crop. We harvest this in June. It's mowed when the plants have reached maximum height and they're just casting their pollen. It wants to be mowed before there's any seed set, because otherwise you're just spreading weeds on your field. But the early mowing gives you a chance that any weeds in your field won't have set any seed, and they'll be green if they're in this bale, but it's the most weed-free mulch available, just June harvested rye. If it's mowed with a mower conditioner, you'll have much better drying results. It'll usually go through your chopper a lot better too. What we try to do is to mow our rye, bale it up, have it ready for our fall when we have to put it on as mulch. Most years we're not planting berries till June or July, depending on how the season goes. Delayed planting of strawberries reduces labor costs by reducing the time that you have to tend the berries in the field. Berries have to be hand-hoed every 7 days to keep the weeds out of them. Every week we shorten the season, we save that hoeing and that labor. We developed our delayed planting system with the aid of a SARE farmer-grower grant. We received two two-year cycle grants on which we basically trialed planting densities We've trialed everything from 6 inches up to like 36 inches apart with different planting systems. And basically what we've found is that if we're going to plant in July, we need to reduce our spacing down to about 6 inches. If we're going to plant in June, we can have what you see here, which is about 10 to 12 inches. If you're planting in May, you can go with the customary spacing of about 24 inches apart with your plants. If the rye comes off early, we can plant our plants farther apart. If the rye comes off late, we take more plants, we just put them in closer to compensate for the lack of season. Usually we harvest rye 1st of June and get it baled in the 1st week of June. But some years, this year's a wet year, we're into the 2nd week of June and we don't have all of our rye harvested yet. We're still getting that put by.
My name is Eero Ruuttila, and we're at Nesenkeag Farm in Litchfield, New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. This is a mixed vegetable farm of 35 to 40 acres of vegetable crops, and it's a certified organic farm, and I've been here 17 years. So the vegetables that I grow here are primarily direct sales to restaurants and specialty food purveyors that sell to restaurants and hotels. A lot of culinary herbs, salad greens, more exotic things relate to Asian crops, because most of my workers are Southeast Asian. Well, basically, cover crops are the foundation of the farm. On an organic system, one of the ideas is to feed the soil, that if you take care of your soil, then you're going to have healthy plants that are going to come from that. Here where this farm is, in southern New Hampshire, I found that the best way for me to add biomass or organic matter into my soil to feed my soil comes from utilizing green manure crops. We don't have access to animal manures in this part of the state. I'm using 2 different green manure crops, and they're used a little differently. Start out in the spring, areas that either I have bare soil or it's winter-killed crops from the previous year I couldn't get into a fall-seeded cover crop. I put in peas and oats. And peas and oats is quick-growing cover crop for the current growing season. And then starting in August and September, as I take pieces out of production on vegetables that were seeded that year, then I'll seed fields to winter rye and hairy vetch. As soon as I can get on the ground, I'll seed field peas and oats, spin it on, and then lightly harrow it in. And one of the things that I really like about it is that it also brings in early income, my earliest income in the spring, because the young pea shoots are very popular with the restaurant trade and also with Southeast Asian or Asian chefs. And usually within about 4 to 6 weeks of seeding, I have something I can start to harvest. That's a really good starter for the springtime. The pea tendrils or pea shoots, pea tips, different names for it. It's not something you can sell tons and tons per acre. I have tons of it. In fact, that's one of the reasons I'm growing it for, is the biomass or the nitrogen that the peas are fixing that. So that's, but on a normal year, I probably can realize gross sales between say $8,000 and $10,000 on 5 to 7 acres that might be seeded to field peas and oats. So what we have here is a strip that I started, it was a strip of hairy vetch and rye. I started turning it over probably mid-April, and everything was broken down enough that I was able to transplant my tomato plants probably about the 3rd week in May. And meanwhile, the rye and vetch on the beds next to it were continuing to grow. Just about at this stage is the point where you want to knock it down. What I'm looking for is for the vetch to start to go to flower, or the rye to be at pollen stage. And what I like to do ideally is to cultivate once with my tractor, and then I'll knock it down with the mower. And then once it's down, we'll use the straw as mulch for the tomato plants, and then we'll bring in some stakes and do a basket weed system to bring trellising for the tomatoes up out of the mulch. I'm utilizing the straw from the strips to start with the mulching process, but I try to have a block of rye and vetch nearby, as you can see behind here, and I'll mow that down. And as I start to mulch these, I'll have a good close by area where I can bring in more mulch without taking a lot of labor moving mulch from one area to another area of the farm. Well, I look at the cover crops as biomass. I mean, two things that are very important for the farm is nitrogen from the fixing of nitrogen and the legume, that's part of the green manure, and biomass is very important. So I want to maximize my biomass, which is bring it to full maturity. Strip system with hairy vetch and rye, overwintered, and then cutting strips in the springtime. I use it for wide space crops, or crops that I choose to grow in a wide space, and that may not traditionally be grown in wide spacing, but pumpkins and winter squash, easy to plant in 10-foot centers, that works very well. And so I can have 5-foot wide beds with the adjacent 5-foot wide strip of the hairy vetch and rye. Tomatoes, I have wide spacing so I can get a good airflow for disease. What we're doing here with green manure cover crops is I'm using them to confuse Colorado potato beetles. I cut strips, plant the potatoes. I try to do my weed cultivation and hilling so that the potato plants are well established, and then at that stage I knock down the rye and vetch. And usually by then it's late June, early July, and that's the first of the potato beetles even come into the field. I don't need to have a big mulch on the ground like I would put on the tomatoes. I just want to have some contact with the straw on the potato plants. With this method, I've never had to spray more than twice and for potato beetles, and at best it's a spot spraying. I don't spray the whole field because good portions of the field there won't be any potato beetles at all. It's usually on an edge of where they'll come in to the end of the rows, or an edge of where a field of solanaceous crops were the preceding year, and they'll find a few rows. This is my spader, which is the primary tillage tool on the farm. I use it for incorporating pretty much all of my cover crops. It needs to operate at slow speed, and so that's, one disadvantage is that when you're bringing that organic matter into the soil and that, I can't move very fast because it's a lot of biomass that's chopping in there. But once it's in the ground and I've made a couple of passes, then I can go in with a field cultivator and do a very rapid pass, make a nice smooth seed bed, and then I'm ready to go. It's like a number of shovels, and it just cuts clods. It does a good job of chopping the straw into the soil, but you get nice clods in that, and then over time that they can break down slowly, so it's much gentler on your soil structure, and it doesn't oxidize all that organic matter you're trying to bring into the soil. When I first came here, there was a rototiller, so that's what I learned on for primary tillage, but I really didn't like what it did to the soil. It really beat the soil up like an egg beater. And I heard about spaders being much better for soil structure and better at incorporating biomass and not oxidizing it. So this seemed to be a much better implement for improving my soil quality. And that's really important for me is doing the best I can for my soil.
I'm Robin Ostefeld, and this is my husband Lou Johns, and we operate Blue Heron Farm. It's in Lodi, New York. We have 10 to 12 acres of organic vegetables, strawberries, and herbs. We also have 2 greenhouses where we grow our own transplants plus transplants for sale. And we market at local farmers market, have a CSA, and sell to co-ops and restaurants.
Our use of cover crops on our farm are primarily for helping to maintain soil organic matter, which is difficult in a continuous cropping vegetable system. And it also gives us a hedge on having to purchase a lot of fertility from compost that we have to buy. About 10, 12 years ago, we started converting our fields to what you see now in the permanent bed situation. Primarily because our soils are quite heavy, and what we started running into is a lot of problems with compaction. So the answer we came up with was to create permanent tire tracks to carry all the weight of our tractors and all the foot traffic that is very common in vegetable production. You just have constant traffic. And it's been very effective. The tire tracks on the farm may look like nice grass and green growth, but for the most part, what you're seeing is a whole host of native grasses, weeds, clovers. You see a lot of dandelion, which may seem like would become a weed problem in the beds, but it doesn't. One of the advantages that we're finding, and we'd kind of hoped for in our permanent tire tracks, is they're becoming a very viable habitat for beneficial insects, spiders. A lot of people also talk about them being a haven for soil bacteria that might not be staying in a permanently cropped farm soils. Even though it may just be anecdotal evidence, our use of control sprays for insect pests has dropped to almost nothing over the last, say, 10 years. I think it has a fair amount to do with the amount of habitat we're creating for beneficials. Within the permanent bed system, we do maintain a fairly rigorous rotation system with our cover crops and our seeded and transplanted vegetable crops, using spring seeded cover crops, fall seeded cover crops, sometimes summer seeded cover crops.
These are oats and field peas that were planted about mid-April. They fit into our cropping scheme because we grow a lot of late fall harvested crops, and they're harvested in late October or November when it's too late to establish a rye and vetch cover crop. So they're left open over the winter. As early in the spring as possible, we get the oats and field peas on. The oats are broadcast just by hand. We put the oats in a bucket. We use other small grains that we might have around. We walk down the tire tracks and throw handfuls and directly apply them to the bed. Then the peas are drilled with our 4-row Planet Junior seeder. The reason we do that is because the peas need to be drilled more deeply than the oats, and the pea seed needs to be economized because it's quite expensive, so we like to plant just the 4 rows rather than broadcast the peas over the bed. The oats are incorporated before we drill the peas. By drilling the peas with the seed drill, we're planting them directly where the vegetable crops will be planted, so the nitrogen is right where it needs to be. The pea seed is inoculated before planting. We like to let it get at least a foot high, and then we mow with the flail mower that chops it up and makes it break down more quickly. so it's incorporated more easily. Then we'll use the rotavator and till it under. Normally the succession that we use, because these beds would be ready to plant in July, is then we would follow it with a transplanted brassica, like broccoli or cabbage, without any additional compost being needed.
These beds have rye and hairy vetch blended together, broadcast together over the entire bed. These will get mowed generally twice, if not sometimes 3 times, with a flail mower, and then turned under with a rotavator. The mowing's for 2 purposes. One is it takes the vegetation and breaks it down into smaller pieces so it incorporates better. The other purpose is to arrest the vigorous growth of the rye and hairy vetch. One of the things we've found with mowing the rye and vetch is the timing and height can be critical in allowing it to regrow and give you like sort of a whole nother flush of vegetative growth, sometimes really encouraging the vetch. On the first mowing, cutting it about 6 to 8 inches tall, taking it down from, say, 1 foot to 2 feet. And that seems to give you really good regrowth and encourages that vetch. Right before incorporation, I try to mow as tight as I can get it cut. Again, to chop the material as fine as possible, and so the stubble isn't as much of a problem for breaking down. So this is what it's all about, growing cover crops. When you get soils that look like this, that are just impregnated with roots from the cover crops, just like spider webs through this thing, making habitat for earthworms. And then you have soil nodules from vetch there that is just going to feed a crop that's coming later.
I'm Lou Lego. This is Elderberry Pond Country Foods, and we're located in Auburn, New York, which is in the northern tip of the Finger Lakes. We are a very diversified fruit and vegetable farm. We have about 100 acres, and 70 maybe of that is tillable, and at any one time half of that is in a permanent cover, either timothy and alfalfa or some other thing that we can cut. The permanent cover crops are principally for giving the land a chance to rest and to revitalize the soil with deep root cover crops, and also to eliminate weeds that have accumulated during the period the land was in production. Then the rest of the farm, which is in production, we do a lot of intercropping. One of the things that we think is unique that we do here is that we use a lot of hybrid mulching. We'll have a living cover, and then within that living cover crop area we'll put rows of plastic within a living mulch, and use the advantage of the living mulch to keep the plastic covered and to give it longevity, and also again to make it a more workable environment so there is no bare soil between those sheets of plastic. This is the first year of our one of our hybrid mulch fields. It was planted in rye in October. The way we normally would do this is we would plant the whole field in rye and then come in on the same day and lay the plastic. This year we tried something a little different, tried planting the rye between the rows of plastic, and don't really like that as well because you ended up with a little bit of a band along the plastic. Plastic in these plantings is all 1.5 mil embossed plastic. In this case it's black, although other colors work also. We lay it with a mulch layer, the most basic plastic mulch layer that you can put down. It's not a raised bed, it's flat on the ground for moisture. And after the 5th year, the plastic, amazingly, because it's been protected by covers and by the growth of high growth in the aisles, is very flexible. So we come through here with a mulch lifter. It comes out in one piece. In this case, we're planting tomatoes into the hybrid mulch system. So the way we will do this is we'll burn holes at a 3-foot spacing. We then take a shovelful of manure and a shovelful of mulch on each side of the hole. Then we come in, set the plants with the manure mixed into the soil, and then cover the plant with mulch to keep any weeds from coming up in the hole. We then set a cage on top of that hole for the tomato to grow up into. With the rye, it's important to let it grow as tall as it can and as big and as vigorously as it can. The rye is cut. The reason it's cut is to protect the plastic from the sun to make it last a long time. It also is a good crop with improving the soil and keeping the weeds down. There are 2 ways to mow the crop, either with a tractor-mounted sickle bar mower, a large tractor-mounted sickle bar mower, or what I prefer is using a smaller hand walk-behind sickle bar mower where you get a little better control and can determine where the straw is going to fall a little better. The goal is to try to get it to distribute somewhat evenly between the plastic and the ground. In this particular planting of tomatoes, we will let this rye that's been cut reseed. Later in the summer, when it thins out a little bit, we'll go through here and seed annual ryegrass with clover, overseed it right on top of what's here. Then that annual ryegrass will die next year, the clover will take over, and that'll be the permanent alleyway mulch for the next 5 years rotation. The clover is mowed several times a year to keep it down, depending on the crop. With a high crop like tomatoes, clover can be allowed to grow pretty aggressively, but with the low crop, it's useful to keep it fairly well mowed. It actually likes being mowed. It comes back with increased vigor, so it's a good crop for that. These strawberries are growing in our hybrid mulch system, and they're growing on black plastic. In here, the plastic has been in now, this is its 5th year. It's had 4 previous crops on it, including melons and tomatoes and peppers and cabbage, and now it's in its final cropping with these strawberries. To maintain the fertility in the plantings for the 4 or 5 years under the plastic, it's very necessary that the field have been in alfalfa or in a good nutritive cover crop for 3 years prior to placing the plastic in the strips. Then, in addition to that, we'll use pelletized chicken manure in the holes at planting to give it a boost for the growing system. It's amazing when you rip this plastic up in the final year, next year when we take this up. The soil under this will be absolutely beautiful.
Hi, I'm Pooh Sprague. The family and I own Edgewater Farm in Plainfield, New Hampshire. It's my daughter Sarah over there, son Raymond, and my wife Ann. Edgewater Farm is about 270 acres, 70 of it tillable, and we're in a diverse mix of small fruit, vegetables, and greenhouse crops. Pretty much everything that we grow on the farm is marketed through our 2 farm stands. Our basic philosophy is that because we have such sandy soils here, and we're using them so intensively, that we just feel that cover crops are an important component in soil amendment and Yeah, just basically maintaining a healthier soil, the fauna in the soil, rather than going in and clean cultivating massive areas. There's a lot of wasted space. So we cover crop whenever we possibly can. We use a summer smother when we have finished up a short-term crop like peas in particular. If we're not going back with something immediately, we'll use a summer smother to suppress weeds and add some organic matter. Buckwheat is probably the simplest summer smother for us to manage. It's very quick. We seed it anywhere. I think the recommended rate is a bushel per acre, but I'm sure that we glom on pretty close to 2 or even more sometimes. It's very quick, it's very easy to work down. We have a set of fairly heavy harrows, and we can go in right now in short order and incorporate this with a set of harrows as well as put on a winter cover crop at the same time. So it's very easy to manage in terms of the machinery that we own. What we have here is a crop of Japanese millet on a piece of fairly heavy ground that we're not using this year, so we're using a longer season cover crop here to build organic matter in the soil. The ground was well prepared when we got onto this. We broadcast about 3 bushels the acre, which is very, very heavy, as you can see. But we figure if you're going to grow a crop and the fertility is there, you might as well put it on heavy, especially with cover crops. I like the Japanese millet over the Sudan as it's a little easier to incorporate. If the Sudan and Sudex get ahead of you, which they sometimes can when you're picking vegetables late in the summer, it can get quite woody and it's very hard to incorporate in the fall. It's now about the 15th of August. Hopefully in another week we'll get someone down here with a heavy set of harrows and we'll harrow this up. Probably once over, we'll chop it up and expose a little of the dirt. We'll come in and broadcast either peas and oats on top of that or hairy vetch and winter rye and disc it in lightly, and that'll give us a winter cover crop. This is a system we've been using for about 10 years on our very sandy soils. Certain crops, like the tomatoes, melons, summer squash, vine crops, we've interseeded between the rows of the crop. We put in strips of clover. This does 2 things for us. One, we feel we're getting some benefit to the soil by cover cropping and not clean cultivating. And second of all, it just makes a nice work environment, as you can see, for the workers to pick. It gives us some cultural benefits in terms of the plants. Instead of crowding them, they've got, 10 feet. That makes it easier to spray. It makes so that they get better air drainage. We use white clover in this system as opposed to grasses. On sandy soil, we found that white clover establishes itself. It tillers out, makes a real nice mat by the fall. We manage it by seeding it early in April. We seed it with a brilliant seeder after the bed's been prepared for both the laying of plastic. We'll come through after the plastic's down, the drip tape's down, and we'll seed the clover, and long before we come in and transplant the crop. It needs the early spring moisture to get established. And then we'll mow it several times, usually when it gets about 6 to 8 inches high with the weeds, or when it gets to be a nuisance, or the help will let me know if it needs to be mowed. It'll usually come up to broad leaves and all manner of weeds, and we mow the weeds off several times. That usually suppresses all the broad leaves. And sometimes we'll have an issue in June with crabgrass, and we may come in with post or some post-emergent grass herbicide. This particular cover crop has not been sprayed with anything. We've just managed it by mowing. White clover is probably the most expensive cover we could put down, but because of its height, because it establishes well for us, and because it is a legume, we think that it's probably well worth it.
I'm Bob Muth, owner-manager of Muth Farms. Our farm is in Williamstown, New Jersey. We farm 80 acres here, 60 acres we own, and 20 acres we continue to rent on a year-to-year basis. Our main crops are tomatoes, all different types, on stakes, also red bell pepper. We also have ground that's certified organic. We grow about 20 different crops in a limited fashion for an organic CSA. We market through a combination of wholesale and retail. We grow cover crops because it's the essence of soil husbandry and sustainable ag, and that's really our main crux here. The idea is improve the ground so that when I'm ready to retire, this farm can be handed over to the third generation and be in great shape. Our rotation strategy is 1 year in high-value vegetables or small fruit. In our case, it's strawberries, and then it's going to be followed by 3, sometimes 4 years where the ground's rotated out. So in effect, we're only farming about 20% each year of our total 80 acres. I implemented this rotation back in 1987, and I know at that time some farmers thought it was crazy to be resting that much ground in an area where there's high land values. But over the years I realized some real benefits. We see pest and disease pressure remain at manageable levels, the soil fertility's gone way up, and stuff grows a lot better simply by prepping that ground in between those high value crops. I think it's important to note that 80% that's setting fallow is not just laying out there idly growing weeds. It's being rested by planter design, and it's all part of the total farm management picture. We're doing that to improve soil organic matter level and to put the ground or make the ground in much better shape so it's easier to grow bigger and better crops with each passing year. For us, when a vegetable crop comes out or small fruit crop, I'm immediately thinking 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And what I try to do is implement that rotation so that ground will be in much better condition. It starts by, when the crop is finished, simply leaf mulching. We spread municipal leaves up to 6 inches deep. That's the maximum amount you can spread in New Jersey by law. Those leaves are worked in the following year. We then plant either hay or Sudex. The hay or Sudex will stay in for 2 to 3 years. We then plow that out and we go back into rye or rye vetch and then back into vegetables once again. So at the end of that time, literally that ground is supercharged. It's ready to go. Hay is a significant part of our rotation. We grow both Timothy and orchard grass on the place. I prefer orchard grass because it's a little more drought tolerant. One of the advantages that I see is it's good not putting a plow on the ground for 3 years. You can really enhance your soil structure through the rooting action of that hay crop. You'll never get rich growing hay, but there is a significant horse population in the area now. These are pleasure horses, and there's a waiting market for good, high-quality hay, which we can provide. It's a source of income for you when that ground's being rotated out. This is Sudex. This is our main summer cover crop. We like it a lot because it helps alleviate soil compaction. You can also use it for nematode and disease suppression. Normally we like to plant Sudex around Memorial Day. This year with the wet weather we got significantly delayed. We were planting in June and into July. I spread or plant mine with a Vicon cedar, sling it out around 25 pounds to the acre and then lightly disc it in. This is an age and stage where we like to flail it when it's about head high or a little bit above. This will be about 4 tons of dry matter per acre. Some people tell me that planting Sudex can create a significant weed problem. That's not a problem as long as you mow it before it shoots those seed heads. That's why we like to see it mowed when it's about a head high, not much bigger than that. Another advantage of Sudex that I've seen over the years is good weed suppression. If you grow this for a couple of years, you can significantly reduce your weed population. There's no light in there for those weeds to get established and grow. Hey, this is municipal leaves from Monroe Township, our hometown. Leaves were banned from the landfills in New Jersey back in 1987 because they were using up valuable landfill space. And we hooked up with the town at that time and started to take them. Initially there were some serious trash problems, but over the years the town worked that out, so it's a very clean product. A lot of people have said that I should be charging some significant tipping fees for these, but I've never felt that way. We've taken them for free all these years. It guarantees that I get a good supply every year. The bulk of the township's leaves come in November and December and early January. I prefer to spread when the ground is frozen because I get virtually no soil compaction at that time. For me, that's December and January. That's when it's a very light workload then, and I can work on these things all day uninterrupted. We spread these anywhere from 3 to 6 inches deep. We use a New Holland manure spreader, and it's anywhere from 3 to 4 passes going at a slow rate with the spreader wide open. When I started with these, I had what I would call a lot of wives' tales, people telling me how it would ruin the ground, destroy your pH, you need tons of lime to counteract the acidity. And it didn't work out that way at all. I always had a good soil testing program, and I saw that 2 or 3 years after we had applied leaves, nutrient levels going up significantly, especially minors, and the pHs were actually starting to climb when I was expecting them to go the other way. They've been a godsend for us. Normally we like to flail mow very low to the ground. However, if there's any residences in the area, houses nearby, we always mow higher and spread into a stubble. And that way we don't have leaves blowing off the field and creating angry neighbors. This ground was just in vegetable crops, and it won't be back into vegetable crops for another 4 years or so. We put leaves on the front part of the rotation because it gives them ample time to break down so that they won't create problems later with tying up nitrogen and clogging up your press pan and mulch layer equipment. There's your leaf application though, right there. That's all you got left after 4 years. One thing I've seen over the years, if you can take leaf mulching and link it with a good cover cropping system, you can really help yourself. Over the years since we started this, we've slashed our fertilizer probably by 60 to 70% or more. There's no need to apply it. It's already here.
I'm Eileen Droescher. I own Ol'Turtle Farm. It's located in East Hampton, Massachusetts. And this is my assistant farm manager, David Shane. Ol'Turtle Farm is an 18-acre farm. We have 12 acres of cropland. We market mainly through a CSA with a little extra going to some local grocery stores. We have 146 shares this season, feeding 227 families. Cover crops are a real important part of our farm. We keep half of our land in cover crop. We use it mainly for our fertility program since we don't use a lot of other types of fertility here on the farm. We also use it for weed suppression. We graze our layers on it. We have a flock of layers that we pasture on our cover crop throughout the season. They are free-ranged within an electric net that's moved every 2 weeks and housed in mobile coops that we move every day. They do a lot of bug control for us as well as create some fertility. We have a system whereby we have cover crop next to crop, so we use it for beneficial habitats as well. Our field space is divided into sections of 30 beds. There's a section of cash crop bordered by 2 sections of cover crop. The next season those are rotated such that the cash crops are now in sections where there was some cover crop. Each of our sections contains 30 permanent beds. They're mostly 300 feet long by 45 inches center to center. We also keep these permanent beds exactly where they are. We use a spader and drive only on the pathways, walk only on the pathways, so the beds always remain the same, whether they're in cover crop or in cash crop. After our cash crop, we would seed with rye and vetch, or just rye as the season gets colder. Then the middle of next season, around July, that rye and vetch would be put down and put into a cover crop that would winter kill, such as oats and peas or Sudex. This section was in cash crop earlier in the season. It's now been spaded down and put into rye and vetch. We are on a permanent bed system, so the pathways always stay in the same place, and the bed is planted with cover crop. We keep the pathways clean so that we're able to find the bed the next year. We use a permanent bed system mainly to reduce compaction and to help with maintain good soil structure. We sowed this the middle of August, and we go by beds. So rye and vetch usually gets put down 5 pounds of rye and 2 pounds of vetch per bed. And since we go bed by bed, we just mix the seed according to the number of beds we're going to put down at that time. This rye and vetch will be allowed to grow until it starts to head out, and then it will be mowed. We usually have to mow twice for the rye and then allow the vetch to come back through and flower, and we mow again for the vetch, and then it will be spaded down and put into a winter-killed cover crop such as oats and peas. This is the equipment we use for planting our cover crop. A simple drop seeder that we purchased from Market Farm Implement. It's made by Shaper Brothers. It's adjustable according to the size seed that you're putting down. We incorporate it with a basket weeder. We use a pipe on the back of the tractor that drags along the bed, and that helps to create the compaction necessary for faster seed germination. This is a field of oats and peas. It was seeded in the mid-August after spading down rye and vetch. The beds are seeded to about 5 pounds of pre-mixed oats and peas per bed. Any of the legumes that we put down, we do inoculate them prior to seeding. The other part of our fertility system is compost. So we have to buy our compost in. It's rather expensive. So we have been using a lot of legumes in our cover crop in hoping to reduce the amount of compost we have to use. We've been experimenting with a combination of Sudex and red clover planted after a cash crop. The Sudex will winter kill, and then the red clover will come back through in the spring and remain through the next season. This Sudex was put in after cash crop, the middle of August. The seeding rate is 3 pounds of Sudex to 2 pounds of red clover per bed. Sudex gives us a lot of biomass, and then the red clover gives us the nitrogen. And red clover is something that we can leave in throughout the next year. We do not have to till it down and put it into a crop that will winter kill, because a couple times of mowing and by the following spring, there's not so much left. It goes down very easy. After the Sudex is winter killed, this is what the field will look like. The Sudex was left in place. The red clover has been mowed 4 times through the season. Will be left here until spring, when it will be spaded down and put into a cash crop. The timing of the planting of Sudex is very important. This Sudex was planted in the middle of August when it was still quite warm. This bed of Sudex was planted 2 weeks later when it had started to cool off, so it's obvious there's going to be a substantial difference in the biomass created by the Sudex. This section is an example of needing to respond to something that didn't work correctly. It was seeded into Sudex and red clover last year, but this spring the red clover didn't come through very well. So in order to reduce our weed problem, we spaded the clover in and planted it into straight Sudex at the end of May. We got a great stand of Sudex, and this has been mowed 3 times. Has created a very good weed suppressive situation.
My name is Steve Groff from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I farm about 200 acres of cropland. Of about 80 of that is vegetables. I farm with my parents and my family, and this farm's been in our family for 3 generations now. We market most of our vegetables to stores and restaurants. About a third of them is marketed locally, and then the rest are marketed toward the Philadelphia area. I started using cover crops about 20 years ago, and I did that originally just for soil erosion control, particularly over winter when the fields may be bare. And a couple years later, I started realizing additional benefits that cover crops give me, mainly having to do with soil health, increasing the aggregate stability of the soil, increasing the microbiological soil life, and we were able to measure that and document those results through university research on this farm. One of the important philosophies that I have in cover cropping is to have something living in the soil at all times. And as soon as my crop is finished, that's a cash crop, I plant a cover crop as soon as possible. For instance, for sweet corn, the early sweet corn, when it's finished at the beginning of July, I go right in and plant a cover crop as soon as I can. It might be oats or hairy vetch, or a mixture of hairy vetch and oats, depending on the situation. And then throughout the rest of the season, I'm going to be planting a cover crop as soon as the field is finished. This is the no-till drill that I use to plant my cover crops. I also use it to plant some of the small grains that I grow as well. This drill is really a good one to be able to penetrate down through crop residues and be able to put the seed down in the soil. That's one thing that's very, very important when you're seeding cover crops, is to get that seed into the soil to get good seed-to-soil contact. I usually use the normal rates that are used for my area here in planting my cover crops. What I've discovered, though, in my experience, is that you can do that if you know you're getting a good seed-to-soil contact. If you have a good planter that is able to cut down through that residue and seed the seeds correctly. If the planter is so-so, or you just have a lot of residue, you're going to have to increase your seeding rate in order to get the kind of stand establishment that you desire. One of the challenges of planting into high residue is it's hard to see where your previous pass was when you're seeding. And I put a foaming marking system on my no-till drill and my no-till planter so that I can see where to plant when I'm coming back through. Because I'm a no-till farmer, I have to consider the kind of residue that my cover crop will generate and consider the kind of crop residue that's remaining on the field. That determines then what kind of cover crop I'm going to plant. This field here is just finished with sweet corn, and I will just plant hairy vetch in here. There's enough residue on the ground that the crop generated that I don't need to add oats like I would if the field would be almost bare. In order to be able to plant into cover crops, they need to be rolled down. And I got this machine, which is a Buffalo rolling stalk chopper, originally used to roll down corn stalks in the spring, and I adapted it to work in my situation. The main thing I had to do was to put a collar around the bearing here so it wouldn't wrap when I'm rolling rye, and to put parallel linkage on each one of these rollers so that it could flex with the terrain of the land. I use this to roll down the cover crops in the spring, and also some of my crops like sweet corn and pumpkins when they're finished, to roll them down in preparation for planting a cover crop. I like to go 10 to 12 miles an hour with the rolling stalk chopper because it's more aggressive that way, and the way it hits the plants and knocks them down and chops them up. The hairy vetch and rye can be controlled by the rolling stalk chopper to a certain degree that depends on the maturity of the cover crop. If the hairy vetch is completely in bloom and the rye is pollinating, the rolling stalk chopper will give about a 90 to maybe 100% control with one rolling. But you can roll it a couple times if you want to, if you don't want to use herbicides. But if you roll earlier before flower, you have to use a herbicide to help kill the cover crop. With a really good cover crop of hairy vetch and rye, it can give you decent weed control. I've had some years where I have not sprayed and got good weed control, and other years where I haven't. So it just kind of depends on the weather and so forth. It is possible, though, to get some weed control benefits
from the cover crop. This is the no-till vegetable transplanter. It is designed to transplant vegetables through a cover crop. The coulters down here in the front slice through the heavy residue and place the transplant into the soil. We have heavy-duty closing wheels at the back, and the distance between the front coulter and the closing wheels is as short as possible in order to make the planter track right on the row, like when we're going our contoured strips or our hillsides. It is possible to take a planter, a conventional planter, and add a heavy-duty coulter in the front and maybe work with the closing wheels in certain situations where there's no stones or relatively easy situations. That has worked. There's people who have done that. But for all-around no-till and especially when you have harder, tougher conditions, you need to have a planter that's built for no-till vegetable transplanting. This is a 7.5 acre field of processing tomatoes and fresh market tomatoes in the background. Last fall I planted hairy vetch and rye in here. This spring we came and rolled it down and no-till transplanted these tomatoes in here. And if you look down here you can still see the rye, the residue of the rye here, and that helps to keep the tomatoes off the soil and keeps them healthier. These tomatoes will be harvested with the machine, and I'll come right back in as soon as possible and plant another cover crop. It may be hairy vetch and rye. It quite possibly could be crimson clover. I am trying to incorporate or actually rotate my cover crops, and crimson clover is basically the second best for nitrogen production to hairy vetch. We're in a field here of pumpkins and gourds that I no-till planted into a cover crop of hairy vetch and rye that was rolled down. Because pumpkins are usually planted later in the spring, the soil's warm enough that I don't need to clear the row to plant it to warm the soil up, like I do with sweet corn. Behind me is a university cover crop research plot. I test some things myself, but I also cooperate with anyone else who's doing research in cover crops. I feel that's very important to try and test something that's new to see if it'll work on a whole farm basis. I've also been a recipient of 5 SARE grants over the years, and that has also helped me to be able to investigate some of the things that I thought could possibly work on my farm that would benefit other farmers as well.